The air in the hall was electric, thick with the kind of anticipation you can almost feel pulsing through your chest. Cameras clicked in rhythmic bursts. Reporters leaned forward, pens ready, the glow of LED screens flickering across expectant faces. The Fortune's Most Powerful Women's Summit wasn't just another industry event. It was where power met perception, where leaders, creators, and icons came to redefine influence. But this year, one woman arrived with an aura that eclipsed all else. Meghan Markle. The name alone sent whispers rippling through the room like wind across still water. Some saw her as a rebel royal, a woman who dared to defy an ancient institution. Others saw her as a master manipulator, hungry for attention, clutching a crown that was never truly hers. And tonight, as she stepped into the spotlight, both sides were about to see something neither expected. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Her entrance was deliberate, every move choreographed. The sleek beige trench dress, the diamond earrings catching the soft stage light, the familiar posture. Chin lifted just enough to signal confidence, but not arrogance. Yet behind that glossy composure, there was something else. A flicker. The kind of controlled tension that only surfaces when someone knows they're walking into a room full of judgment. Because Meghan wasn't here as a duchess. She was here as a speaker. An equal. At least, that's what everyone else thought. But for Meghan, equality was never the goal. Recognition was. As the crowd murmured, the moderator took her place. Alyson Shontell, the editor-in-chief and chief content officer of Fortune. Known for her sharp mind and sharper questions, Alyson had interviewed world leaders, tech moguls, and billionaires who could make or break industries. She wasn't easily impressed, nor easily intimidated. And that, perhaps, was the first sign that tonight wouldn't go as Meghan had imagined. Let's rewind a moment. Earlier that morning, Meghan had arrived at the Ritz-Carlton under tight security. She'd been briefed, styled, and perfectly curated for the summit. Her team rehearsed her talking points: empowerment, digital branding, leadership as a modern woman. But one topic, above all, was non-negotiable: her title. She was, as always, to be introduced as the Duchess of Sussex. It's not vanity, her aide had whispered defensively to the event coordinator. It's respect. But respect is earned, not demanded. Backstage, Alyson was reviewing her notes, cross-checking names, titles, and key themes. When she reached Meghan's line on the list, she paused. The official program read, Meghan Markle, founder, Archwell Foundation. No mention of Duchess. No mention of royal titles. Just a name and a role. It wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. And when Meghan's assistant saw that, the tension began to rise. A quiet confrontation unfolded behind the curtains, voices low but sharp. The request was clear. Fix the title, or Meghan would not be pleased. The event staff refused. It wasn't protocol to include ceremonial titles for those who'd stepped away from official royal duties. It was Fortune's rule, and Fortune didn't bend rules for anyone. By the time Meghan took her seat on stage, the storm was already brewing. The opening applause faded, and Alyson welcomed the audience. Her tone was composed, professional, perfectly balanced between warmth and authority. Please join me in welcoming Meghan Markle, founder of the Archwell Foundation. Silence. Just a half-second pause. But to Meghan, it might as well have been an eternity. That one missing word, Duchess, hung in the air like a ghost. Meghan's practiced smile didn't falter immediately. She nodded, waved, crossed her legs with deliberate grace. But anyone watching closely could see it. The tightening of her jaw, the slight flare in her nostrils, the flicker in her eyes that betrayed something volcanic beneath the surface. And it was only the beginning. As Alyson launched into her first question, about women redefining leadership in a post-digital age, Meghan responded with polished precision. She spoke of compassion, authenticity, mental health. She used phrases like empowerment through empathy and reclaiming narrative. The audience nodded politely, some even applauded. It was standard fare for Meghan, the language of controlled relatability. But Alyson wasn't interested in sound bites. She pushed. You've spoken a lot about leadership through compassion. How do you reconcile that with the perception that your public actions sometimes appear calculated or performative? The air tightened. For a moment, Meghan froze. Not long enough for the untrained eye to notice, but enough for the cameras to capture a millisecond of hesitation. Then came the laugh, that well-rehearsed, slightly breathy sound she uses to deflect discomfort. "I think everyone is entitled to their interpretation," she said lightly. "But compassion is never performative when it comes from sincerity." Alyson nodded slowly, but didn't smile. She wasn't here to flatter. She was here to uncover. As the interview continued, the energy in the room began to shift. Meghan's charm, once effortless, seemed to strain under Alyson's steady, fact-driven questioning. The conversation drifted toward public accountability, philanthropy, and the optics of wealth and activism. Meghan, used to adoration from carefully curated media appearances, wasn't accustomed to this kind of neutrality. She mistook it for disrespect. And when Alyson addressed her again, Meghan, without the Duchess title, the mask slipped. It was subtle at first. A sharp inhale. A blink that lasted a fraction too long. A forced laugh that didn't quite land. But in those tiny gestures, a truth emerged. Meghan needed the title more than she needed the message. Because to her, the title wasn't just a symbol of status. It was armor. Without it, she was just Meghan from California, the actress who once played a paralegal on television. And that was a version of herself she'd spent years trying to bury. As the minutes passed, tension simmered beneath the politeness. Alyson kept her tone steady, guiding the discussion toward purpose and legacy. "How do you define power today?" she asked. Meghan hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "Power is influence. Power is the ability to make change through storytelling." Alyson tilted her head slightly. "And does that power rely on titles?" A beat of silence. The audience shifted, sensing something raw emerging. Meghan smiled again, but it was brittle. "Titles are symbolic," she said. "They remind people of what you've accomplished." Alyson leaned forward slightly. "Or of what you've inherited." The words landed like a spark in dry grass. Somewhere in the front row, someone gasped quietly. Cameras caught Meghan's face as she exhaled slowly, recalibrating. "I believe legacy is earned," she said softly, "no matter how it begins." For a moment, the conversation found its rhythm again. But deep down, everyone in the room could feel the shift. The unspoken tension wasn't just between two women. It was between two definitions of power, one born from merit, the other from status. As the interview wound toward its midpoint, Meghan began to lose her composure. Her hands, usually still, fidgeted. Her tone grew defensive. Alyson remained calm, professional, unflinching. And then, the audience heard it. That subtle but unmistakable moment when Alyson addressed her one last time as Meghan instead of Duchess. The smile vanished. "You know," Meghan said, her voice carrying that rehearsed calm that barely masks irritation. "Some people find it respectful to use proper titles." Alyson didn't miss a beat. "At Fortune," she said evenly, "we recognize people for their work, not their titles." The audience murmured, caught between admiration and disbelief. The tension was palpable, the kind that forces you to hold your breath because you know something irreversible has just happened. And Meghan, cornered on her own stage, smiled a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Because in that instant, her royal illusion cracked. The cameras caught it all, the twitch in her jaw, the flash of disdain that crossed her features before she pulled herself back into composure. And though the interview continued, the story had already written itself. Backstage, Meghan's team scrambled, whispering about optics, trending hashtags, possible statements. But Alyson? She simply thanked the audience, shook Meghan's hand, and walked off stage with the quiet confidence of someone who didn't need to prove her power. By the next morning, the headlines would explode. Hashtags would divide timelines. And the video clip, just 8 seconds long, would circulate the globe faster than any royal announcement. But for now, in that hall filled with applause that sounded more polite than genuine, one thing was clear: a shift had occurred. The Duchess had become just Meghan again. And the woman who refused to play along? She became the story's unlikely hero. But what came next would make that moment look tame, because Meghan wasn't done fighting for the title she believed defined her. And as you're about to see, that fight was only beginning. The applause faded, but not the tension. Cameras clicked like insects in the dark, feeding on every flicker of emotion. Meghan sat tall, shoulders back, lips parted in a polite smile. But behind her composure was a storm waiting to break. She'd spent years mastering this moment. The flawless posture, the soft voice, the radiant glow that said confidence. Yet there was one thing she hadn't rehearsed for, a world that no longer bowed. Alyson Shontell smiled at her guest, her voice measured and calm. "Let's begin," she said. That simple phrase felt like the drop before a free fall. From the start, it was clear Alyson wasn't here to flatter. She wasn't one of those talk show hosts who laughed too loud or agreed too easily. Her questions came sharp, precise, surgical. Each one seemed to peel away a layer of the performance until something raw began to show. "Meghan," Alyson began. "Again, no Duchess. You've spoken a lot about leading with empathy. What does that look like in action?" Meghan smiled, as if the question were soft and familiar. "It's about being willing to listen, to put yourself in someone else's shoes. Empathy is the foundation of leadership." She said it perfectly, almost too perfectly. The crowd nodded politely. Alyson's expression didn't change. "That's a beautiful thought," Alyson replied. "But some might say empathy is harder when you're surrounded by privilege. How do you balance that?" It was subtle, but the room shifted. The tone was no longer adoring. It was investigative. Meghan's eyes glinted for a moment. "Well, I think privilege is something that can be used for good," she said carefully. "When you have access, you can open doors for others." Alyson tilted her head. "And have you?" The question hung there, quiet, clean, devastating. Meghan's smile tightened. "Absolutely," she said, her tone carrying the faintest edge. "That's what Archwell is about. Using influence to create impact." Alyson nodded slowly, flipping through her notes. "Your critics might say that sometimes your influence feels curated, that your appearances, your speeches, seem less about impact and more about image. How do you respond to that?" The word image hit like a stone. Meghan blinked. "I think that's unfair," she said. "People will always project their own biases onto you. I can't control what others see. I can only control what I give." Alyson smiled faintly. "So what are you giving right now?" You could feel it, the invisible gasp rippling through the audience. For a split second, Meghan froze. She laughed softly, deflecting. "Hopefully, inspiration," she said, her voice catching the rhythm of performance again. "Hopefully, a reminder that women can define themselves." But Alyson wasn't smiling. "Define themselves," she repeated. "Even when that definition is borrowed from something royal?" The air thickened. There it was, the invisible elephant that had followed Meghan into every room since 2020. The Duchess who wanted equality. The woman who wanted freedom but still clung to the crown. Meghan exhaled, voice calm but eyes sharp. "Titles don't define me," she said. "My work does." "Then why insist on one?" Alyson asked gently. It was surgical, deadly, brilliant. For a heartbeat, Meghan said nothing. You could almost hear her thoughts turning. Thousands of interviews replaying in her mind, lines rehearsed in mirrors, every soundbite crafted to perfection. But this wasn't a friendly arena. This was a stage where power was earned by answers, not applause. She finally smiled. "It's not about insisting," she said. "It's about identity. Some things become part of who you are." Alyson nodded but didn't let go, even when the institution itself rejected that identity. The crowd murmured. Meghan's eyes flickered, her voice thinning. "I think it's less about rejection and more about evolution." Alyson leaned back. "Evolution's good," she said. "But sometimes, evolution means letting go." The audience clapped softly. It wasn't for Meghan. The rhythm of control had shifted. Meghan tried to regain her footing. "Of course," she said. "But it's also about representation. People still see me as a duchess, and I think that visibility can inspire young girls." "Or mislead them?" Alyson asked. And there it was, the quiet sting. The question that sliced through the glossy rhetoric like a knife. Meghan's laugh sounded thinner now. "I think young women are smart enough to see through media narratives," she said. "They know who I am." Alyson's eyes flicked toward her notes again. "That's interesting," she said. "Because polls in both the US and UK suggest the opposite. That public trust in your message has decreased." The audience shifted again. The murmurs were no longer curiosity. They were tension. Meghan's smile didn't fade, but her tone sharpened. "Statistics can be misleading," she said. "What matters is the work behind the numbers." "Fair," Alyson replied. "But public perception shapes impact, doesn't it? Influence without trust is fragile." Meghan blinked. The blow landed, and for the first time, her carefully crafted calm began to crack. She adjusted her hair, leaned back slightly, and said in a voice just a little too loud, "I think people are intimidated by change." Alyson didn't answer. She let the words hang there, unchallenged, exposed. That silence, 5 long seconds of it, was worse than any confrontation. Meghan shifted in her seat again, her breathing subtly quicker. Her gaze darted toward the cameras. She smiled, but this time, everyone saw the effort behind it. Do you know that look? The one where confidence has to be manufactured second by second? That's what filled her eyes. Alyson broke the silence softly. "You've spoken about being misunderstood," she said. "Do you ever wonder if misunderstanding comes from overcuration?" Meghan's voice wavered. "I think it comes from people believing what they're told." "By the media," Alyson clarified. "By everyone," Meghan replied. "Even by people who should know better." It was defensive, personal. You could hear the undertone of bitterness, the years of public scrutiny boiling just beneath her calm. Alyson didn't press this time. She just said quietly, "That must be exhausting." And for a heartbeat, something human flashed across Meghan's face. Vulnerability, sadness, maybe even regret. "Yes," she whispered. "It is." The audience softened. For a moment, empathy returned. But then, just as quickly, Meghan ruined it. She added, "But I suppose that's the price of being royal." The air froze. You could feel every journalist, every executive, every woman in that room silently exchange glances. It wasn't what she said, it was how she said it. That single phrase shattered the fragile authenticity she'd just built. Because in a room celebrating merit and achievement, Meghan had just reminded them she still measured her worth by a crown. Alyson's smile was faint, her tone steady. "Royalty means different things to different people," she said. "Here it's earned." The audience erupted in polite applause, louder this time, directed at the message, not the woman. Meghan's eyes darted toward the crowd, trying to gauge if it was for her or against her. Her lips curved into another smile, but her hands betrayed her. Her fingers tapped nervously against her knee. Alyson closed the segment with one final line that felt like both a conclusion and a warning. "Authenticity," she said, "doesn't need a title." The lights dimmed. The music swelled. The crowd stood. Meghan clapped too, but her gaze stayed fixed forward, blank and burning. Because she knew exactly what had happened. She'd walked into the Fortune Summit to reclaim power and walked out exposed. But this wasn't over. Because the real story, the part no one saw on camera, was about to unfold backstage. Where microphones were still hot, where tempers finally snapped, and where the illusion of control, once and for all, would vanish. It was supposed to be just another corporate conference moment, a polite, intellectual exchange on leadership. But that one word, one missing word, turned the room into a pressure cooker, and by the next morning, it would become the most replayed clip on social media. The word was Duchess, or rather, the absence of it. It happened in real time, broadcast to thousands online, and watched by a room full of Fortune 500 executives. And in that brief instant, you could see something shift in Meghan Markle's face, the unraveling of an identity that depended on how people addressed her. "Ms. Markle," Alyson Shontell said, glancing up from her cue card. Her tone was calm, deliberate, utterly devoid of malice. "Let's talk about influence and accountability in modern media." No sneer, no sarcasm, just professional neutrality. But to Meghan, it was rebellion. The title she'd fought to protect had just been erased on stage. And there were cameras everywhere. Her reaction came not in words, but in micro-expressions, so subtle, yet so unmistakable. Her smile froze for a heartbeat too long. Her eyes twitched, then darted toward Alyson, then back toward the crowd. The corner of her lips tightened. She took a slow breath through her nose and said softly, "Of course." Most people in the audience didn't even register it at first. They clapped, adjusted their glasses, took notes. But the internet doesn't miss details. The clip would soon be dissected frame by frame, slowed down, looped, and mimified. Because that was the exact second the illusion cracked. Inside that single breath, years of careful branding fell apart. A woman who'd built her empire on compassion and composure was, for the first time, visibly rattled. And Alyson, sensing the shift, didn't flinch. She continued, voice steady. You've said that storytelling is power. How do you balance personal narrative with public responsibility? Meghan leaned forward, flashing her famous practiced smile. That's a great question, she said, though her tone was sharper than usual. I think authenticity is key. When you share your story truthfully, you create space for others to do the same. It sounded good, almost perfect, but her body betrayed her. Her hand gripped the arm of her chair. Her right foot tapped faintly. Every pause in Alyson's speech seemed to stretch into eternity. The live audience sensed it now, the tension, the friction, the quiet defiance wrapped in smiles. And Alyson wasn't done. Do you think, she asked, that sometimes the way your story is told can overshadow the causes you represent? Meghan laughed softly, too softly. I think when you're a woman of color in the public eye, people will always try to control your narrative. The crowd nodded sympathetically. It was a smart move. Shift the narrative to familiar territory, pull back control. For a moment, it worked. Until Alyson responded. I agree, she said. But that doesn't explain why you still correct people for not using your royal title. Isn't that another form of control? A hush swept through the room like a cold wind. Meghan blinked. She hadn't expected that. Not on stage, not from Alyson. I think that's a matter of respect, Meghan replied slowly. It's part of who I am. Alyson nodded once, calm, unyielding. Respect is earned, not inherited. The silence was immediate. You could almost hear the collective gasp as Meghan's jaw tightened ever so slightly. She laughed again, this time brittle. I believe I've earned it, she said. Alyson's eyes didn't waver. Then you shouldn't need to remind anyone of it. The audience erupted, not in shock, not in scandal, but in applause. Real applause. And Meghan knew it wasn't for her. For a split second, she froze. Eyes wide, smile twitching, composure cracking. The applause rang louder, echoing through the ballroom. Alyson stayed composed, simply nodding in thanks before turning back to the next question. But the cameras? They lingered. Every news outlet, every journalist in the room caught the moment. That perfect collision between image and truth, between power and ego. The still shots would flood the internet within hours. Meghan's slightly forced smile. Alyson's composed posture. The caption variations practically wrote themselves. Duchess no more. Fortune editor stands ground. Respect versus royalty. And once again, the story became bigger than the interview. By the time the segment ended, Meghan's mind was no longer on the discussion. Her answers became shorter, her tone more clipped. Her gaze occasionally drifted toward the camera lights, probably imagining how it would all look online. She knew. She always knew. She'd spent years controlling her public image, perfecting it like an art form. But now, that image had slipped out of her hands. When Alyson wrapped the segment with a gracious smile and said, "Thank you, Meghan, for joining us," the word Meghan hit like a slap. Not Duchess, not Royal Highness, just Meghan. And she couldn't hide the flare of anger that crossed her eyes before the applause drowned it out. The lights dimmed, and the audience rose for the next speaker. But as Meghan stood to leave, she muttered something under her breath, so low it almost blended with the applause. Almost. One of the audio engineers caught it. A simple line, sharp and cutting. Unbelievable. Even here, I have to teach them how to show respect. That mic was still hot. The words leaked before she even left the stage. Within an hour, a journalist in the media pit had the clip. Within 2, it was online. By sunset, it was viral. Meghan Markle caught on hot mic complaining about title snub. Teach them respect. Fortune summit chaos. Duchess demands respect, but gets reality check. The memes came next. Split-screen videos of Alyson's calm composure next to Meghan's frozen smile. Hashtags like #JustMeghan and #NotADuchess trended globally within hours. For once, Meghan wasn't the one controlling the narrative. But the real fire didn't come from the media. It came from the public reaction, the collective fatigue of an audience that had watched, for years, as Meghan preached humility while clinging to grandeur. Comment sections filled with brutal honesty. She wants equality but insists on hierarchy. Respect isn't a crown you wear, it's how you behave. Imagine demanding empathy and entitlement in the same breath. The irony was too rich, too sharp, too perfect for the media to resist. And Alyson? She stayed silent. No interviews. No statements. Just quiet professionalism. That silence made her the hero of the story. Meanwhile, Meghan's PR team scrambled behind the scenes, issuing carefully worded statements about miscommunication and editing out of context. But it was too late. The damage was done. For the first time since Megxit, Meghan wasn't the one shaping the conversation. She was the conversation. And behind closed doors, her fury was volcanic. "She humiliated me," Meghan reportedly told her team, pacing back and forth in her hotel suite. "She did it on purpose. You saw it." Her assistant hesitated. "It didn't seem personal, Meg." "Of course it was personal," she snapped. "She wanted to make me small in front of them. That's what women like her do. They hide behind professionalism and pretend it's integrity." But the truth? Alyson hadn't done anything but ask questions. Meghan's downfall wasn't sabotage, it was self-inflicted. Still, that didn't matter now. Meghan had chosen her enemy. And by the next morning, her team was preparing a counterattack. Exclusive interviews, soft focus features, a flood of sympathetic posts emphasizing female solidarity and double standards. But there was one problem. None of it would work. Because Alyson Shontell wasn't a gossip blogger or a royal correspondent. She was Fortune's editor-in-chief, the embodiment of credibility. And every attempt to undermine her only made Meghan look more desperate. Even major outlets like CNN and Bloomberg weighed in, praising Alyson for holding ground in the face of entitlement. Meghan's silence, once a strategic tool, now felt like weakness. Her words, once weaponized charm, now rang hollow. The moment had escaped her. And that's what made it go viral. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was real. For once, the mask had slipped, and the world had seen not the Duchess, not the humanitarian, but the human, fragile, defensive, prideful. The irony? That was the moment she had longed for all along, to be seen as real. But not like this. And as dawn broke over Washington, the video had reached 20 million views and counting. Her face, frozen mid-smile, was everywhere. The woman who once controlled every word, every image, every angle, had finally lost control. But what came next would take things far beyond public embarrassment. Because someone close to Meghan, someone who'd seen everything backstage, was about to leak the rest of the story. And that leak would expose something far darker than a bruised ego. It started like a whisper, barely audible beneath the hum of applause, the rustle of cameras, and the echo of clapping hands. But for those who caught it, those sitting in the first two rows, it was unmistakable. Meghan had snapped. As the applause faded, Alyson turned slightly to acknowledge the crowd. Meghan leaned toward her mic, her smile tight as glass. "It's Duchess Markle, actually," she said softly. Not loud enough to seem unprofessional, but sharp enough to cut through the air like a blade. A few people chuckled nervously, unsure if it was a joke. Alyson froze for a microsecond, then looked back at her guest with the kind of practiced composure that only years in journalism could give. She smiled faintly and replied, "Of course, Meghan. Let's continue." But the damage was done. That one line, half whisper, half warning, became the headline before the event even ended. Someone from the audience had recorded it on their phone, and within an hour, the clip was uploaded, captioned, and spreading like wildfire. "It's Duchess Markle, actually." Those 5 words carried centuries of irony, because they didn't just expose entitlement. They exposed the contradiction at the core of Meghan's brand. The woman who claimed to reject royal hierarchy but demanded to be recognized by it. And Alyson? She knew exactly what had just happened. The calm smile on her face wasn't just composure. It was quiet triumph. She'd just witnessed a public relations implosion, live on stage, and she hadn't even needed to raise her voice. The audience reaction was muted at first, half disbelief, half fascination. Meghan tried to move on, laughing it off with a tone that strained to sound breezy. "I'm only teasing," she said, waving a hand lightly. But her voice wobbled at the edges. Alyson didn't respond to the deflection. She simply glanced at her notes, then said evenly, "Right. Let's talk about authenticity in leadership." The audience exhaled, tension broken, but not forgotten. Meghan leaned back, smile frozen, trying to regain rhythm. "Authenticity," she said carefully. "I think being authentic is about not letting others define you." Her words sounded hollow now. The irony was too fresh. Her insistence on a title had just proven the opposite, that she was still chained to other people's definitions of her. Alyson nodded politely. That's true. But authenticity also means accepting when the world sees you differently than you'd like, doesn't it? It was a subtle jab, gentle, almost philosophical, but it landed like a thunderclap. Meghan laughed softly again, eyes narrowing. I suppose everyone's perception is their reality. The crowd nodded, but the laughter was gone now. The atmosphere had changed. It wasn't admiration anymore. It was curiosity, the kind that borders on discomfort. And Alyson, ever the professional, refused to offer a lifeline. She continued, "So, when you step on this stage as Meghan Markle rather than as Duchess of Sussex, what message do you want women watching to take away?" The question was flawless. It forced Meghan to acknowledge the very thing she'd tried to avoid. Her pause was long, too long. You could feel the silence stretch across the ballroom. The cameras zoomed in. "I think," she said finally, "I want women to know they can be more than what people label them." It was an attempt to steer back to empowerment, but even she knew it sounded hollow now. Alyson smiled faintly. "Even when that label is one you demand." You could almost hear the air leave Meghan's lungs. The audience gasped softly. Meghan blinked once, twice, and then gave a small, polite laugh. "I think we're all allowed to take pride in where we come from, don't you?" "Of course," Alyson said. "But pride and entitlement are very different things." That's when it happened, the moment that would define the night. Meghan's facade shattered. The mask of poise slipped just enough for the audience to glimpse what lay underneath: irritation, pride, and disbelief that anyone would dare challenge her. Her smile faltered. Her hand tightened around the microphone. "I'm not entitled," she said firmly. "I've worked my entire life to be where I am. I've faced things most people can't even imagine." Alyson listened silently, her gaze steady. "Everything I've done," Meghan continued, her tone climbing, "has been about creating space for others, to use their voice, to have representation. And yet I'm constantly told to shrink, to stop being who I am. I will not apologize for being a duchess." The crowd fell silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Even the camera operators hesitated to move. Meghan caught herself too late. Her eyes darted around the room, realizing she'd lost control of her tone. She smiled suddenly, forcefully. "Anyway," she said, "that's what authenticity means to me, showing up fully as yourself." But it was too late. Alyson smiled, not unkindly, and said, "Thank you for your honesty." Her tone was warm, almost maternal, but the subtext was unmistakable. The applause that followed wasn't admiration, it was relief. Relief that the tension had finally broken. Meghan's expression softened again, but the cracks were there now, visible even through the camera lens. For the rest of the interview, she stuck to safe, predictable answers. But the damage was irreversible. Because every audience member, every journalist in the room, knew they'd just witnessed something real, not the polished perfection of a media-trained duchess, but a woman unraveling under the weight of her own contradictions. And the internet, as always, was merciless. By the time Meghan left the stage, the clip was everywhere. Headlines blared across news feeds and Twitter feeds alike. "It's Duchess Markle, actually," Meghan snaps at Fortune editor. Awkward silence as Meghan corrects host. Fortune's Alyson Shontell holds her ground in title clash. And the reactions? Brutal. She can't go 5 minutes without reminding us she's royalty. Entitlement disguised as empowerment. Imagine demanding humility from others while demanding to be called Duchess. But not everyone criticized her. Some defended her, claiming the media was once again twisting her words. She was just correcting a mistake, one supporter wrote. Alyson was disrespectful. Yet even those voices were drowned by the wave of mockery that followed. The clip was remixed into memes, TikToks, reaction videos. YouTubers dissected her tone. Body language experts paused every blink. Late-night hosts made jokes. One comedian summed it up best. She left the royal family to escape titles. Now she's mad no one uses it. Behind the scenes, Meghan's team went into full crisis mode. Phones buzzed, statements were drafted, talking points rehearsed. "We'll say it was a misunderstanding," one advisor suggested. "Humor lost in translation." "No," Meghan said, pacing across her suite, her voice tight. "We'll say it was intentional. They were disrespectful. They set me up." Her team hesitated. "Meghan, that might escalate." "It already has," she snapped. Meanwhile, Alyson Shontell remained silent. She didn't tweet. She didn't issue a statement. She didn't even reference the incident in Fortune's post-event press release. Her silence was her statement, and it only made Meghan look smaller. The contrast was devastating. Alyson looked like the embodiment of professionalism. Meghan looked like a woman unraveling over a missing word. The next morning, major news outlets began to weigh in, not on the event itself, but on the symbolism of it all. The Washington Post wrote, Alyson Shontell reminded the world that power earned through merit trumps power claimed through title. Time magazine added, in one sentence, Shontell demonstrated why decorum and dignity are louder than entitlement. And for Meghan, the fallout was personal. Friends stopped calling. Sponsors postponed meetings. Even Netflix reportedly requested clarity on her public image strategy. Her brand had become unpredictable, and she knew exactly who to blame. That afternoon, she sent a single text to her team. I want her handled. They didn't ask who. They didn't need to. Because the storm she was about to unleash wouldn't just target Alyson Shontell's professionalism. It would target her reputation. But what Meghan didn't know was that the next move she made would backfire so explosively that even her most loyal allies would begin to turn away. Because behind the curtains of the Fortune Summit, a secret recording was about to surface, one that would expose Meghan's anger in a way no one had ever seen before. And when the world heard it, everything would change. From the outside, Meghan looked calm, composed even. But up close, something had changed. Her smile was mechanical. Her words, once smooth, now landed sharp and defensive. The lights that once flattered her now seemed harsh, unforgiving. And yet, no one could have predicted how fast the facade would crumble. Because in those moments after she demanded to be called Duchess Markle, the world began to see something it hadn't before. Not the poised humanitarian, not the smiling royal, just a woman desperately clinging to the image of one. When the Fortune event concluded, attendees began buzzing. Not with admiration, but with disbelief. Did she really correct the host on stage? Whispered a woman from Microsoft. Another shook her head. That wasn't confidence. That was ego. They didn't say it loudly. They didn't need to. Whispers spread faster than headlines. Meanwhile, Alyson Shontell, calm as ever, walked off the stage and into the green room. Her assistant rushed to her with a look of panic. It's already online, she said. That clip. It's blowing up. Alyson raised an eyebrow, half amused. Of course it is. She took a sip of water, checked her phone, and saw the notifications flooding in. Mentions, tags, quotes. Everyone had captured the same 8-second moment. Some called it awkward. Some called it iconic. But one phrase kept appearing again and again, cracks in the crown. Across town, in her hotel suite, Meghan was pacing. Her team sat around her, phones buzzing, laptops open, voices overlapping. Every few seconds, she'd glance toward the mirror, fixing her hair, touching her earrings, then looking away as if the reflection itself irritated her. How bad is it? She asked. Her communications director hesitated. It's circulating. Mostly just clips, reactions, memes. It'll pass if we issue something calm and professional. Meghan's voice was low. And Alyson? She's saying nothing. Of course she isn't, Meghan muttered. That's her game. Stay quiet, and let everyone project virtue onto her. Her assistant tried to sound reassuring. You still have control, Meg. We can reframe it. Spin it as empowerment. You were just what? Meghan interrupted. Correcting someone who disrespected me? I am a duchess. They should acknowledge that. There was silence. A heavy, awkward silence. Then, slowly, the PR director spoke. You left the royal family, Meg. That complicates the message. Meghan shot her a glare sharp enough to silence the room. Titles don't disappear because the British press wants them to. The people still see me as one. Do they? That's the question no one in the room dared to ask aloud. Because deep down, even Meghan's team could feel the shift. The sympathy that once surrounded her was thinning, replaced by a collective exhaustion. Too many controversies. Too many contradictions. And this time, it wasn't the tabloids doing the damage. It was Meghan herself. Outside the hotel, reporters waited in the cold, microphones ready, cameras flashing every time a black SUV pulled into the driveway. The Fortune Summit clip had already crossed 5 million views. By nightfall, it hit 10. News outlets began dissecting her reaction in forensic detail. CNN called it a defining cultural moment on entitlement. The New York Times published a feature titled The Fragility of Image, When Influence Meets Ego. The irony was excruciating. Meghan had spent years trying to position herself as the voice of modern empowerment, yet her reaction now embodied everything she once claimed to reject. In the days that followed, the backlash intensified. Think pieces poured in. Pundits debated her behavior. Social media turned savage. She preaches authenticity but demands formality. She left the monarchy but acts like she's still in it. She's addicted to validation, not impact. Each tweet, each video, each meme chipped away at the carefully crafted image Meghan had built since leaving the royal family. Even her allies hesitated. A few former friends posted vague, non-committal messages about grace under pressure. None defended her directly. And Alyson? She stayed silent still. That silence spoke louder than any interview could. It became a symbol of strength, the professional woman standing her ground against entitlement. But Meghan didn't see strength. She saw betrayal. Because in her mind, she wasn't the villain. She was the misunderstood heroine, the woman who had been disrespected in public, stripped of her dignity by a journalist who refused to acknowledge her title. It was the same pattern over and over again. When criticized, she saw persecution. When challenged, she saw cruelty. And this time, that mindset pushed her toward a dangerous decision. Her team suggested issuing a statement acknowledging the misunderstanding. Something calm, reflective. Meghan stands by her respect for professional equality. The draft began, and recognizes the power of humility. She read it twice, then tore the paper in half. "No," she said coldly. "We're not apologizing for anything. Meg, silence is weakness," she snapped. "They need to be reminded who I am." And with that, she ordered her team to arrange an exclusive television interview to set the record straight. It was a mistake, a massive one, because instead of sympathy, the public saw something else entirely: deflection, blame, denial. When the interview aired 2 days later, Meghan sat across from a friendly talk show host, dressed in soft beige, voice calm and wounded. "It's disheartening," she said, "when women tear down other women instead of lifting them up." She never mentioned Alyson by name, but everyone knew. The backlash was immediate. Viewers called it tone-deaf. Critics accused her of playing the victim again. And Fortune, true to its brand, released a short, dignified statement. "We stand by our values of equality, professionalism, and merit." That single line was enough to end the debate. Meghan's image took another hit. Brand partners went quiet. Invitations to upcoming panels vanished. PR analysts began calling it the Fortune fallout. And the worst part? Her outburst had made Alyson Shontell a legend. Within a week, Alyson was invited to speak on multiple networks about leadership integrity. She declined them all. Her silence was now part of her mystique. Meghan watched from her California mansion, scrolling through articles that praised Alyson's restraint. Each headline stung like a personal betrayal. Her husband tried to comfort her. "It'll pass," he said softly. "People move on." But Meghan knew better. This wasn't a scandal that would fade. It was an unmasking. And deep down, she knew she'd handed it to them. Still, she couldn't let it go. Because when your power depends on perception, every bruise to your image feels like a mortal wound. So, late that night, as she scrolled through her phone in silence, Meghan made a decision that would change everything. She would fight back, not through PR, not through apology, but through exposure. Someone, she believed, had leaked that hot mic moment. Someone from inside the event. And she was going to find out who. But what Meghan didn't realize was that while she was preparing her counterattack, another recording, one she didn't know existed, was already on its way to the press. And that recording would do what no headline ever could: destroy the illusion completely. Because for the first time, the world would hear what Meghan really said when the cameras stopped rolling. The ballroom lights were softer now, but the air was thick, almost oppressive. Meghan sat rigid in her seat, pretending to look comfortable, while Alyson Shontell, calm as a statue, shuffled through her notes. The surface calm between them hid a dangerous undercurrent, the kind that makes the audience lean forward instinctively, sensing that something real, something unscripted, is about to happen. And then it did. Alyson looked up, her expression steady but her tone shifting ever so slightly, from conversational to surgical. "You've spoken beautifully about leadership, empathy, and empowerment," she began. But I want to ask you something more personal. That was the pivot, the one Meghan never saw coming. When you talk about authenticity, Alyson continued, what does it mean to you when the public feels your narrative doesn't always match your actions? The question landed like a flash grenade. The audience shifted, not a word spoken, but you could hear the shuffle of clothes, the creak of chairs, the collective inhale. For a fraction of a second, Meghan's expression faltered. She blinked, tilted her head, and smiled. I think people are entitled to their opinions, she said softly. And perception doesn't always equal truth. Alyson nodded slightly. But don't you think perception becomes truth when it's repeated often enough? That question cut deeper. Meghan blinked again. You could almost see her mind racing, searching for footing. She forced another smile. Well, I think that's why I speak up. To set the record straight. It was polished, but defensive. Alyson didn't react. She waited, patient as gravity. The silence stretched just long enough for everyone to feel it. Then came the real blow. Do you ever wonder, Alyson asked quietly, if the image you're trying to correct is one you helped create? The room froze. Even the cameraman lowered his lens slightly, uncertain if he was capturing a historic moment or a professional disaster. Meghan laughed, a nervous, brittle sound that barely masked her discomfort. I don't think that's fair, she said. I think the media builds narratives, not individuals. Alyson leaned forward, still gentle, still polite, but relentless. Perhaps, she said, but doesn't authenticity mean owning how we contribute to the narratives around us? You could almost feel the oxygen leaving the room. Meghan's smile cracked again. She opened her mouth, then closed it. And that pause, that single, stretched moment of silence, was the most revealing thing she'd done all night. Finally, she spoke, slower now. It's very easy to sit and judge someone else's story, she said. But no one can understand what it's like unless they've lived it. The crowd murmured softly, half sympathetic, half skeptical. The line had emotional weight, but also a rehearsed quality. Alyson saw it. She didn't push harder, she didn't have to. The damage was already unfolding on its own. She smiled. That's true, she said. But leadership often means being accountable even when the story isn't convenient. Meghan's posture shifted. She crossed her legs, uncrossed them, and leaned forward with the smile of someone desperate to reclaim the narrative. I am accountable, she said, her voice suddenly sharp. That's why I speak. That's why I build. That's why I use my voice, to represent those who can't. The crowd clapped, but it was half-hearted. Even they could feel the defensiveness pulsing through her words. Alyson waited until the noise died down, then quietly asked, and do you think you represent those who can't, or those who won't challenge you? Silence. The question sliced the air like a razor. Meghan blinked again, caught between shock and restraint. I'm not sure I understand the implication, she said, though her tone betrayed that she did. Alyson's gaze was calm, unflinching. Sometimes, she said, leadership isn't about protecting your image. It's about inviting criticism. The words hung there like an open wound. For a few seconds, no one moved. Even Meghan's team, watching from backstage, went still. Because everyone knew, they'd reached the point of no return. Meghan took a deep breath, that familiar media-trained exhale meant to reset the tone. I think criticism is fine, she said, voice tight. But it has to come from a place of fairness, not bias. Alyson smiled faintly. And who decides what's fair? Another silence. Another pause. The energy in the room shifted again, and for the first time, the audience's sympathy leaned away from Meghan. It wasn't about cruelty or dislike. It was about fatigue. People were tired of polished answers, tired of rehearsed authenticity. Alyson's calmness had done something unexpected. It made Meghan's defensiveness look loud. And then, just when the tension seemed unbearable, Alyson asked the question that would echo for weeks. Do you ever wish you'd stayed? It was simple, but in context, it was devastating. Meghan froze. Stayed. In the royal family. Alyson clarified softly. Do you ever wonder what would have been different if you'd stayed? The question struck like lightning. It bypassed the PR training, the branding armor, and went straight to the wound. You could see it. Her eyes flickering, her shoulders tensing, that tiny twitch in her jaw that said everything she couldn't say aloud. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. I don't live in hypotheticals, she said. I live in the truth of my choices. Alyson didn't respond. She let the words linger, heavy and unresolved. But Meghan couldn't stop herself. The silence made her fill the void. Leaving was the right thing, she said quickly. It gave me freedom. It gave me peace. Alyson raised an eyebrow. And yet, you still use the title. The room gasped. Even Meghan's own team, backstage, gripping their headsets, knew this was the moment. The exact second the interview turned from challenging to legendary. Meghan stared at Alyson for a long moment. Then she smiled again, but this time it was forced, brittle, exhausted. I think women are allowed to exist in complexity, she said, her tone clipped. You can be both independent and royal. You can be both modern and traditional. It's not either or. Alyson nodded. Of course. But what happens when the two collide? It was the question Meghan couldn't answer, because it was the question she'd been avoiding her entire life. The audience didn't clap. They didn't cheer. They just watched her, waiting. But she didn't answer. She simply smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't hide defeat, but tries to outshine it. The host thanked her, and the crowd politely applauded, but everyone knew they'd witnessed something seismic. Alyson had cracked the royal illusion, not with aggression, but with truth. And Meghan, for all her eloquence, had nothing left to give. Backstage, the tension snapped. Meghan ripped off her microphone the moment she stepped behind the curtain. How dare she hissed. That was ambush journalism. Her team scrambled to calm her down, but she was shaking, half fury, half disbelief. She was supposed to ask about empowerment, she snapped. Not that. Meg, one assistant said softly. You told them no questions were off limits. Don't patronize me, she shouted. That's when it happened. One of the sound engineers, still connected to her mic feed, caught every word, every furious syllable. And within hours, that audio would leak too. In it, Meghan could be heard fuming about ungrateful American women, about elitist journalists, about how the world owes me respect. It wasn't meant for the public, but the public was going to hear it anyway. And when they did, Meghan's carefully built image wouldn't just crack. It would collapse. Because for the first time, her words, not headlines, not gossip, not speculation, would tell the truth. The truth she'd spent years running from. It began with a name. A single name that always seemed to haunt Meghan wherever she went, Catherine. The mention of Princess Catherine during the Fortune interview was subtle, unplanned, and yet it changed the entire temperature of the room. It was as if a ghost had entered, uninvited but impossible to ignore. Alyson Shontell knew exactly what she was doing. She waited until Meghan had regained a sliver of composure, her voice even, her smile mechanical once more. Then, with that same disarming calm, she said, You've spoken a lot about redefining power and authenticity. Would you say you and Princess Catherine share similar philosophies when it comes to leadership? The air thickened instantly. You could feel it. Even the cameras seemed to zoom closer, as if the universe itself leaned in to listen. Meghan froze for half a second, long enough for the world to notice. Her face stayed neutral, but her fingers twitched against the armrest. Her voice, when it came, was smooth but sharp at the edges. Well, she said slowly, I think every woman brings something unique to the table. Catherine has her way of doing things, and I have mine. Polite, diplomatic. But underneath, there was venom. Alyson tilted her head. Of course. But Catherine has often been praised for her quiet consistency, her ability to connect without controversy. Do you feel that kind of approach works in today's world? That was it. The spark. The subtle, elegant provocation that made Meghan's composure flicker. Meghan's smile widened. Too wide. I think it's easy to seem consistent when the media protects you, she said. When you're not constantly attacked for simply existing. The crowd murmured. Some eyebrows raised. Alyson's expression remained unreadable. So you're saying her image is a product of protection rather than authenticity? Meghan blinked, realizing too late she'd stepped into the trap. I'm saying everyone's story is curated, she said quickly. Mine just happens to be more public. But Alyson wasn't done. Interesting, she said softly. Because some might argue that being public was your choice. That single sentence detonated quietly. Meghan's jaw clenched, though her smile remained fixed. I think choosing to speak up isn't the same as choosing to be attacked, she replied. Silence never changed anything. I refuse to play the game others are comfortable playing. There it was again, the familiar defiance. The posture of martyrdom. But something in the crowd shifted. This wasn't the sympathetic reaction Meghan was used to. It was curiosity laced with discomfort. Alyson leaned in slightly. Sometimes, playing the game isn't about submission, she said. It's about wisdom. The words were delivered like silk, but landed like stone. For the briefest moment, Meghan's facade cracked again. Her smile trembled. Her eyes hardened. Wisdom is subjective, she said finally. And it's easy to call something wise when it fits your narrative. The audience was silent now, captivated, because they could feel what was happening. This wasn't an interview anymore. It was a mirror, and Meghan didn't like what she saw in it. Alyson's questions were calculated but fair, clinical but human. She didn't accuse. She simply reflected. And that reflection was lethal. The tension between Meghan and Catherine had been a whispered undercurrent for years, a wound hidden behind PR smiles and royal press releases. But now, right here, under the warm lights of Washington, that rivalry was suddenly naked. Meghan's tone softened slightly, trying to recover her footing. Catherine and I are very different people, she said. And I think diversity in approach is a strength. Alyson nodded. It can be. But difference doesn't always equal division. Do you ever regret how public that contrast became? There was the trap again. Meghan inhaled sharply, then smiled thinly. I don't live with regret. I believe everything happens for a reason. Even broken relationships? Alyson asked quietly. The pause that followed was heavy. Painful. Honest. Meghan exhaled. Even those, she said finally, her tone quieter now. Growth doesn't come from comfort. The crowd applauded softly. It was the first genuine moment she'd had all night. Real vulnerability flickering through the cracks. Alyson nodded, perhaps sensing that she'd touched something human beneath the performance. But Meghan, misreading the energy, pushed too far. I think, in some ways, she added, Catherine represents the old system. I represent the future. The applause stopped dead. The audience didn't move. You could almost hear the collective wince ripple across the ballroom. Alyson didn't even blink. That's a bold statement, she said calmly. But the old system still seems to be thriving. It was surgical, beautifully brutal, and it left Meghan stranded in her own words. She laughed lightly, a sound that rang hollow in the tense air. Well, change takes time, she said, trying to soften the blow. It doesn't happen overnight. Alyson smiled, her eyes glinting. No, she said, but it also doesn't happen when you alienate everyone who could help you. And just like that, the room erupted, not with laughter or applause, but with something electric. The shock was palpable. Even Meghan's expression faltered. Her breath hitched, her lips parted, but no sound came out. It was the kind of silence that ends careers or cements legends. She finally spoke, voice trembling ever so slightly. I don't believe I've alienated anyone, she said. People show you who they are when you step out of their shadow. Alyson smiled faintly. And sometimes, she said, we see ourselves more clearly in that shadow than we'd like to admit. The sentence hit like thunder, because everyone knew what she meant. The shadow wasn't Catherine's, it was Meghan's own. The one she cast over herself with every contradiction, every performance, every need to prove that she still mattered more than anyone else in the room. And Meghan knew it too. You could see it in her face. That flicker of realization. That rare, fleeting moment of truth. The cameras zoomed in. The crowd sat frozen. Meghan straightened her shoulders, forcing composure. Well, she said softly, I suppose that's your interpretation. Alyson gave a polite nod. Interpretations are what makes stories powerful, she said. And that was it. The moment the interview turned from uncomfortable to iconic. By the next morning, clips of that exchange would dominate social media. The Catherine question, as the press called it, became the centerpiece of every talk show and podcast. She walked right into it. One commentator said, all Alyson did was ask about leadership, and Meghan turned it into rivalry. Even Catherine's supporters weighed in. The hashtags #GraceLikeKate and #ShadowOfSussex trended across the UK. Public opinion was shifting fast. Meghan's words, meant to assert dominance, had instead painted her as petty and jealous. And behind closed doors, Meghan's fury boiled. She did that on purpose, she told her assistant that night. She knew what she was doing. Her assistant tried to calm her. You handled it gracefully. No, Meghan hissed. She humiliated me. Her voice cracked on the last word, and for a moment, she stood there, breathing hard, trembling with anger. It wasn't just humiliation. It was something deeper. Because for years, Meghan had tried to outshine Catherine, to be the one who modernized the monarchy, redefined womanhood, and became the world's favorite royal. And in that single conversation, she realized something she could never say aloud. She was losing that battle. And the woman who defeated her wasn't Catherine. It was Alyson Shontell. But what came next would be far worse. Because if Meghan's fragile royal image had cracked before, the next moment, the one no one was supposed to hear, would shatter it completely. A hot mic, a careless whisper, and a sentence that would echo across continents. The mask was about to come off for good. The ballroom was empty now. Chairs half-turned, programs scattered, lights dimming into the quiet afterglow of something seismic. But in the stillness, an unnoticed detail pulsed in the dark. Meghan's microphone was still on. Hot. Live. Recording everything. She didn't know it. No one did. The last claps of applause faded, replaced by the hum of backstage chatter. Camera crews packing up, assistants whispering about dinner plans. But among those echoes, Meghan's voice cut through, sharp and trembling with suppressed fury. Unbelievable, she muttered. Absolutely unbelievable. She thinks she can talk to me like that. Her publicist rushed over, whispering, Meg, calm down. Calm down. Meghan snapped. She humiliated me on stage. In front of CEOs. In front of women who should have been looking up to me. The publicist's eyes darted nervously toward the sound crew. Meg, your mic. Don't care, she interrupted, pacing, heels clicking on the floor like gunfire. No one disrespects me like that. Not after everything I've done. The sound tech froze, staring at the signal still spiking on his board. He looked at his supervisor. She's live, he whispered. What? She's still transmitting to the house feed. Across the floor, Meghan's words filled the empty auditorium, echoing faintly through the speakers no one had yet turned off. She thinks she's clever, Meghan continued, voice rising. She's nothing but another smug journalist trying to make a name off me. They all do it. They love tearing me down because I left that family. Because I had the guts to walk away. Someone from the AV team rushed to mute the channel, but not before a few attendees lingering in the back heard everything. One of them, a young producer with a phone still recording for behind-the-scenes footage, caught it all. Within hours, that clip would leak. And when it did, it would detonate online like a bomb. But in the moment, Meghan didn't care. She was pacing, talking faster, her polished calm unraveling into a raw monologue. They'll twist this, you know, she said, pointing to no one in particular. They'll make her look like the hero. But who is she? A journalist? She doesn't have to live with hate campaigns, death threats, lies. She's never been stalked by tabloids. She's never had to survive them. Her assistant stepped forward carefully. Meg, you should sit down. I'm fine, she said through clenched teeth. I'm perfectly fine. But she wasn't. Her voice cracked. They all want to see me fall, she said, quieter now. Every time I try to do something good, they look for ways to drag me back down. And she thought she could make me look small. Her reflection flickered across the mirror in the dressing room. Perfect hair, perfect smile. But her eyes told the truth. She didn't look powerful. She looked cornered. Behind her, the door creaked open. One of the event staff peeked in cautiously. Ms. Markle. It's Duchess, Meghan snapped without turning around. The staffer froze. Yes, ma'am, she said quietly, backing away. That exchange, captured too, became the second half of the viral clip. The part that confirmed the worst suspicions. By midnight, the leaked audio hit social media. The title? Meghan Markle meltdown at Fortune Summit. Hot mic catches everything. The hashtags exploded. Hashtag Hot Mic Meghan. Hashtag Duchess No More. Hashtag Fortune Fallout. People didn't even need visuals. The audio was damning enough. The tone, the fury, the entitlement. It stripped away the brand of compassion she'd worked so hard to project. Within 12 hours, late-night hosts were joking about it. Morning shows debated it. Opinion writers compared it to the infamous royal tantrum stories from years past. One British commentator summarized it coldly. She left the palace, but the palace never left her. The public split instantly. Supporters called it a setup. She was provoked, they argued. Who wouldn't be emotional after that interview? But critics saw something different. They saw authenticity, just not the kind Meghan had built her empire on. Because in that unfiltered recording, Gone was the polished voice of female empowerment. Gone was the advocate for kindness and equality. What remained was the voice of someone bitter, wounded, and hungry for recognition she couldn't demand anymore. A journalist from The Guardian wrote, "What's tragic isn't that Meghan lost her temper. It's that she lost her story. The moment she demanded to be called Duchess, the woman who once claimed to reject titles vanished." Meanwhile, inside Fortune's headquarters, chaos brewed. The PR team met early the next morning. "We can't confirm or deny authenticity," one lawyer said, "but we can emphasize professionalism. We don't comment on off-air remarks." Alyson Shontell, however, didn't attend the meeting. She sat quietly in her office, phone face down on the desk, watching the news cycle play out without saying a word. Her inbox overflowed. Interview requests, speaking invitations, offers to write op-eds. She declined every one. Her silence was now the story's moral anchor. And Meghan hated it. By evening, the leaked audio had racked up 25 million views. Reaction videos flooded TikTok. Memes, parodies, dramatic reenactments. Every frame dissected, every syllable analyzed. But it was one phrase in particular that ignited the firestorm. "She thinks she can talk to me like that." That single line became the defining quote of the scandal. It symbolized everything the public now believed about Meghan: her obsession with status, her hypersensitivity to criticism, her need for control. Back in California, Meghan scrolled through her phone long past midnight. The glow of the screen reflected off her face as she read post after post. She thinks she's better than everyone. Respect is earned, not demanded. This is who she really is. She slammed her phone down on the nightstand. "They're all against me," she muttered. Harry, half asleep beside her, stirred. "Meg, stop reading it." "I can't," she said. "It's everywhere. They're destroying me." Harry sat up, rubbing his face. "Then do what you do best. Control the story. Sit down with someone. Tell your side." Meghan turned to him slowly. "No, this time, I'm not explaining myself." "Then what are you going to do?" he asked quietly. Her eyes darkened. "I'm going to make them regret it." It wasn't a threat to Alyson. It was a vow. To the world, to the media, to anyone who had dared strip her of her crown. But before she could strike back, before her team could orchestrate the next PR move, something else surfaced. The uncut audio. Someone, no one knew who, released the full version of the backstage recording. And in that version, there was a sentence no one had heard before. At one point, Meghan's voice, tired but venomous, could be heard muttering, "I made that crown relevant. Without me, they'd still be boring." That was the sentence that broke the dam. Because it wasn't just arrogance anymore. It was contempt. Contempt for the family she'd left, for the press she blamed, for the very audience that once adored her. And this time, even her staunchest defenders had no words. The fallout was nuclear. Sponsors distanced themselves. Invitations were rescinded. Hollywood insiders whispered that she'd become too unpredictable. Alyson remained silent still. Her restraint now looked prophetic. And Meghan, realizing too late that silence was the one weapon she never learned to use, decided to retaliate the only way she knew how: with exposure. She wasn't going to be the only one humiliated. And the first person in her line of fire? Alyson Shontell. Because in Meghan's mind, the editor...